Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is your brother. It's me, Qasim Ibn Ali Khan from Houston, Texas, in the United States. The Imam of Masjid al-Tawheed. This masjid was established in the middle of a very poor and distressed African-American neighborhood. It is called the 5th Ward of Houston, one of the most crime-ridden areas and most dangerous areas of Houston. It was, at least at one time. There was 100 churches in that area and no mosque, no masjid. Many Muslims moved to America and moved to Texas, even to Houston, from many parts of the world. Many of them seeking fulus, or seeking education, but not one. And many of them established beautiful masajid and built beautiful masajid and madrasas all around Houston and Texas. But no one was interested in establishing a masjid in the 5th Ward in Houston, where those people were crying and begging for da'wah, crying and begging for Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He delivered me to Houston, and when I saw an opportunity, there was one of those churches that was recently built, was closed down. I couldn't convince any Muslim businessman or anyone who moved to that area to invest and get in that building for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fortunately, there was a Muslim brother who knew a non-Muslim who was willing to invest and get in that property. So we were able to buy that church and transform it into a madrasa and a masjid. It just so happens that the pulpit where the preacher was preaching shirk and polytheism is exactly opposite of the Qibla, which means that when we built the mihrab and the minbar, we're turning our back on shirk in favor of Tawheed. But now we are facing a problem, we're facing a dilemma, that the person who we borrowed the money from to purchase this church is now demanding his repayment. We're 5 months late repaying him, according to our contract. And we all know that in the Quran, the longest surah in the Quran, which contains the longest ayah, is dealing with contracts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, honor the contracts you have made. This man has a right to go to the courts, and if we don't pay him his money, he has a right to close the masjid down and close the madrasa down, therefore losing the hope of the people. My dear brothers and sisters, I was born and raised in a neighborhood just like the neighborhood where that masjid now sits. A poor African-American neighborhood where I didn't know anything about Islam. A neighborhood just like that, where someone gave my father da'wah and he accepted Islam. And my father gave my younger brother da'wah and he accepted Islam. My younger brother gave me da'wah and I accepted Islam. This was 40 years ago. And here I am now, traveling around the world, proudly saying, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. The people in that neighborhood have a right to hear Islam. They have a right to the da'wah. Their children have a right to be taught Islam. And they should have the same opportunity that I had to hear Islam and to preach Islam. But they'll lose all of their hope. These people that are dealing with, have a crime-ridden area where there are drugs and alcohol and prostitution, not to mention the shirk and polytheism. These people have an opportunity and have a right to hear Islam, but they'll lose all of their hope if that masjid closes down. Why will they lose their hope, brothers and sisters? Because no other Muslim, no other businessman, no other sheikh will be willing to reopen a masjid in that neighborhood. These people will lose all of their hope. So we're appealing to you, my dear brothers and sisters, in this blessed month of Ramadan, to help us save this house of Allah. And I promise you, and the promise isn't coming from me, the promise comes from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if you build a house for worship for Allah in this life, Allah will build you a palace in the afterlife. Help us preserve the house of Allah. Send in your contribution right away and help us preserve this. Pay this man back, get him out of our hair, and maybe one day, just like many enemies to Islam, maybe one day he will hear da'wah and he may come back and give this money back to us and say, here, you can have this for the love and pleasure of Allah. Help us, my dear brothers and sisters, Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.